Welcome to our webinar. Before we get started, in the spirit of reconciliation, Alongside Families would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today, always was and always will be. So, my name is Christy, and I'm a parent to an amazing 9-year-old young autistic human, and I'm an ADHDer myself. I'm joining you from beautiful, dark, and young country on the Central Coast. You're welcome to share the name of the country you're on in the chat. So, we have the wonderful Raelene Dundon, author, psychologist, and all round excellent human being, joining us to present Understanding Masking. So, tonight we'll explore what masking is and how it can show up in children, how to raise masking concerns with educators and therapists, and how to notice the quieter, more subtle signs that your child might be masking. That's it for me. I'll hand over to Raelene. Thanks, Raelene.
Thank you, Christy. Hi, everybody. To my slides. Here we go. So tonight, as Christy mentioned, acknowledgement, although Christie's was lovely. I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the various lands that we're meeting on today, and to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that might be participating in this webinar tonight or watching the recording, and also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. Now, this is me. I won't go over this in lots of detail. As Christy said, I'm an autistic ADHDer, ed and dev psychologist. I'm also a play therapist. I run Okie Dokie Childhood Therapy, which is a paediatric practice with my husband in Melbourne. I'm also a lecturer in child play therapy at Deakin University. And we've also recently launched an education part of Okie Dokie called Divergent Matters. So you might see, I think in the chat website, links to both Okie Dokie and Divergent Matters. So I've been working for a long time now, mostly with neurodivergent children and families. And so luckily for me, actually, that's been a special interest. My whole family is neurodivergent. And so I really come at things from a lived experience perspective as an ADHDer, as well as a parent of neurodivergent children, and from a professional perspective due to my training. So I think it really helps me to explore these lots of different perspectives and be able to present information to you from that way as well. So what is masking? This is a general definition. There are lots of different definitions out there, but basically masking or camouflaging, which it can actually be known as well or referred to as well, is the conscious or unconscious act of concealing or suppressing our thoughts or emotions, or changing our behaviours to fit in with societal expectations, and often to avoid negative experiences. So it's really an act of hiding our true self to meet the expectations of others. Now, something that I often get asked, particularly by parents, I would say, because it's a bit of a confusing aspect to talk about. And so parents will often ask, doesn't everyone mask? Isn't it great to mask? Doesn't that mean that children are able to um, adapt and do what other people are expecting them to do in different situations. And we're going to talk a bit more about this tonight. But I think it's important to recognize that what we might talk about as masking, and these are just a few kinds of examples. So being extra polite when you're with strangers, for example, using your best manners, maybe acting a little bit differently at work. You might have a work persona, and then the person that you are with friends, it might be a little bit different. Perhaps not showing how upset you are in a situation due to the people you're with, maybe not wanting to appear too vulnerable, or maybe knowing that they're going to react in a way that isn't going to be helpful to you, or maybe you're not wanting to show that side of yourself in a particular situation. Maybe even doing something like using a phone voice when you're answering phone calls. I know many of us have that kind of, a real shift in the way that we speak when we answer the phone. Now, all of these things could be talked about as masking, but I think using the term masking has much bigger connotations associated with it. And so we can actually think about these kinds of things that perhaps everyone does in their general life as social adjustments. So these are small things that we do to make perhaps social situations or work situations or other things just a little bit easier and help us fit in with the situation, not to hide who we are, but to assist with perhaps being seen in a particular way by our colleagues, for example, from a professional point of view, maybe. Um, so we're making adjustments which all people do engage in, but masking takes things to another level, really, because it is about hiding who we are, often due to the negative responses of other people and stigma associated with sometimes our behaviours, or the way that we think or feel about different things. And also often as a way to fit in for children desperately wanting to have friends and be the same as their peers. And we'll talk tonight about some of the challenges and also the dangers, really, of children engaging in masking long term. So I just wanted to make this distinction, and I will talk a little bit more about that difference between neurotypical social adjustment and autistic masking as we go through the slides tonight. So now that we've made that distinction, if we think about masking as being a much more intense and I guess serious way of being to hide our natural way of existing, I guess. It is really common, unfortunately, in autistic individuals. It is also common in other neurodivergent neurotypes, so certainly ADHDers, for example, will mask and often do. And certainly individuals that have blended neurotypes, so that are autistic, ADHD, that are PDA, and individuals with other neurodivergent neurotypes will at times mask. So it's important to recognise that it is, I think, much more common in the neurodivergent population. Some neurotypical individuals may mask. It would be more likely that individuals that engage in masking may be highly socially anxious, for example, or have other reasons for engaging in masking as opposed to what we were just talking about, that social adjustment. Now, for autistic individuals, masking can be a conscious effort, like I said, a way to fit in and engage with peers, particularly neurotypical peers. It can also be a learnt response. So it can happen in an unconscious way. And unfortunately, it's often the result of children, especially, learning that their natural way of doing things receives a negative response from people that they are socializing with or around. And so they learn to hide their natural way of doing things. And that can become a really big issue because as young children, engaging in behaviours that are suppressing the way that they are or that they naturally are and taking on other personas, pretending to be somebody else, um, can lead to mental health challenges, which we'll talk about in a minute, but also individuals really struggling to know who they actually are when they get older. And for lots of late diagnosed individuals, I would say especially women and female identifying individuals and gender diverse individuals, it is really, really hard and quite confronting to realize that you have perhaps been playing a role for a large part of your life, and going through a journey to actually learn who you really are as an authentic individual, is a really big thing. So these early things that behaviours that children perhaps take on to not feel rejected, to feel like they're able to fit in with their peers, have lasting impacts. Now, some of the common behaviours that we might see in autistic individuals that can be masking behaviours. Now, I will say that um, some of these examples, so for example, copying phrases from TV and movies, can be part of autistic communication, for example. However, if an individual is copying and practicing the way that other people are talking in movies or TV shows, and then using those in social situations to try and appear more neurotypical, that absolutely is likely to be a masking behaviour. We might also see autistic individuals suppressing their stimming, so actively working against the need that they have to stim because of how it might look to other people. They may force eye contact again because they know that it's expected, and a social convention, even when it feels uncomfortable for them. They might hide special interests because maybe they've been taught or had a reaction from others that's meant that an interest that they've held on to, maybe from early childhood, like Thomas the Tank Engine, is seen as babyish and inappropriate for a 10-year-old, for example. Um, it shouldn't be the case, but in some social situations, unfortunately, it can be. And so they may hide their interests, perhaps even pretend that they like interests that their peers are engaging in, even though they don't really like those things, because that's more socially acceptable. They may engage in scripting within conversations, so have rehearsed ways of responding to different situations primarily, but have rehearsed ways of responding to particular questions that people ask, especially with regards to things like small talk. And they may be able to follow social rules, neurotypical social rules, but be exhausted afterwards. So all of those things are things that we see in autistic individuals that are masking. And we're going to go into that in a little bit more detail. Now, this is just an example of what masking could look like. It's not a picture of every autistic individual masking, but it gives you a little bit of an idea. And this is certainly a situation that I hear very often from parents and from children, and in discussions with educators. So Sarah, in this example, who is 8 and is autistic, sits perfectly at school, so sits perfectly still in the classroom, makes eye contact with the teachers, participates in activities, appears to be paying attention, is a model student. At home, as soon as she gets home from school, she goes to her room. She needs to sit and rock and listen to music for an hour before she's able to function and interact with the family. She has meltdowns over really small things that are happening, and she's really not able to recount, even though she is capable. She can't tell you what she did in the day. what things were enjoyable or important. She isn't able to recall those things. And so, what might actually be happening for Sarah is that the amount of energy she's using to keep it together, to not do things that are unusual or that might draw attention, to look typical at school and fit in with her peers and do things that are expected according to her teacher, are absolutely exhausting. And because she's using all of that energy at school, she's got to spend time recovering at home before she's even able to participate in family life and function. And certainly, I do all the time have discussions where teachers are saying, oh, they're doing so well, there's no problems, they're not distressed, they're participating in everything. And parents are seeing that after school restraint release that is sometimes talked about, that explosion and those meltdowns and that distress when they get home. And there's such a big contrast. It's often really difficult for teachers and other education staff to understand that what's happening at school could be contributing to those behaviours, and they can't relate to it because they just don't see it. And so, it's an important thing for us to understand masking so that we can advocate for our children in school settings. So something that, is a really common thing, and so Sarah is a really good example of this, is this idea of good behaviour. And so when we have a child that is towing the line in class, they're following instructions, they're participating, they're sitting still and quiet, not making any problems, just getting on with their work. Often adults see that as a child that is just really conscientious, they're compliant, they're not causing any problems. And so they don't see the need to intervene, to look into changing perhaps the way they're teaching or the environment that the child's in, because it seems like they're doing fine. Now, obviously, there are children that engage in these behaviours that are doing fine. It would be more likely that those children are neurotypical children that are completely fine, although there may be some autistic children that, and there are some autistic children that thrive in the classroom environment and will have all their needs met in that way and look like a model student. However, this can also indicate that a child is using an enormous amount of mental energy and physical energy too to stay still, to listen to what's happening, to engage in ways that are expected. It could be that a child is shut down due to sensory overload and they're going through the motions of participating, but are really not going to actually be able to effectively learn in that environment. They might be following scripts and responding to their teacher in rote learnt ways that they know will mean that the teacher leaves them alone and doesn't ask them any more questions. They might be suppressing the need to move or regulate and holding it together when actually they need to be up and moving to learn better, or to be fiddling or fidgeting with things to actually be able to be regulated. And they may be, and this, people pleasing is something that we absolutely see in children that mask, but they may be prioritising other people's comfort over their own well-being. So they feel like what they need to do is make sure that everybody else is happy and okay at the expense of their own comfort. So it is really important for us to recognise that sometimes behaviour that's calm and compliant might actually be a child that is working so hard to meet those expectations that they are exhausting themselves. And that isn't the way that we want autistic children to be in settings like school and preschool. So I talked about social adjustment earlier, and that idea of tweaking things for particular settings, I guess. There's more likely to be a neurotypical behaviour, although, as I said, neurotypical individuals can mask. But it's, I think, helpful to look at social adjustment compared with autistic masking to actually see what those differences are. And I think that it can really help in our understanding of how big masking is for individuals. So, social adjustment that neurotypical individuals might engage in, more regularly engage in, tends to be occasional. It's going to be, okay, well, I'm in this sort of setting, and so I know I've got my way of being here that's a bit different to somewhere else. So I'm going to be a little bit different at school because it's helpful in class for me to really just listen and do what the teacher says instead of being cheeky like I might be at home. It tends to be intuitive and automatic. So often neurotypical individuals will kind of know what they need to do to tweak things and to adjust and be able to do that quite naturally. It doesn't require a lot of effort or thought. And it is usually a choice. It's usually something that um, an individual will perhaps not always in a conscious way. They may kind of fall into line a little bit, perhaps, but generally speaking, they're choosing to adapt their behaviour a little bit to make things work easier for them. And that might be to make it easier on them, but it might also mean that it's easier for them to get things done that they need to get done if they act a particular way and do things in a particular way. In contrast, autistic masking can be something that can actually be pretty much all encompassing and constant, and certainly happens in a really frequent um, way for, I would say, the majority of autistic individuals that do mask. It requires deliberate, conscious effort. It is a choice because what we have to do is think constantly about what we're saying and where we're looking and what our body is doing and what other people are saying and doing and how to make all of that work in the way that we think is expected in a particular situation. Because of that constant thinking and interpreting and figuring out what we need to do in a particular situation, it is absolutely physically and emotionally exhausting. And it can really feel like we're putting on a performance and being someone completely different in different settings to meet the demands of other people. It is also something that feels very necessary for autistic individuals because their past history might have taught them that they are not accepted for who they are if they act and speak and do things in authentic ways, or they may be really scared that if they show people their true self, that they are not going to be accepted. And so it is a necessity to put on that mask and that performance in different situations. Now, there are, watching the time, and I've been already talking for way too long, but there are three main elements of masking, and these are elements that have been identified and actually incorporated into some measurement tools that actually look at masking, particularly in adults, but they're absolutely relevant in children as well. And so these three areas are compensation, where an individual will deliberately learn social skills or other behaviours, communication styles perhaps that don't come naturally to them, but that they feel they need to be able to do in a particular way to be able to fit in, blend in with others, neurotypical individuals in particular. Masking or suppression of their autistic traits, so hiding stimming, hiding the way that they would naturally want to communicate, um, hiding their emotions, because that may not be seen as being acceptable in particular situations or with particular people. And then assimilation, which is really actively trying to blend in and appear neurotypical. So when we're thinking about compensation, what individuals might do, and children and adults will engage in these practices, but we might watch other people to learn what normal, typical responses are. We might practice facial expressions, practice reacting to different things, so that we know what that looks like and figuring out whether it does seem like it looks the same as other people. We might memorize phrases from movies, and perhaps even rehearse conversations with peers. So think about how we might rehearse or how we might engage with peers, but we might also memorize and actually practice with movies or YouTube videos, pretending that we are someone in the video and saying one line like we're talking to characters as a way of practicing and getting a feel for what that feels like, that conversation will feel like, and how to communicate in a particular way. We also might copy peers' mannerisms, so that we're doing things similar to them. And often in children, particularly autistic children, we will see kids that take a particular interest or liking to a peer, maybe at preschool or at school, and they will copy their interests. They potentially will start speaking like that child. They will copy some of the mannerisms. And it's because they're trying to emulate that person that they like so that they like them. Or perhaps if they see that that person is someone that other people seem to be um, relating really well to, that person might have lots of friends, they might be really popular. The autistic child might want to be just like that individual and they will copy everything about them. Um, in an effort to be accepted in the same way. Unfortunately, it often doesn't result in that. It results in that peer not wanting to be copied and other peers noticing that they're doing things the same. But for the autistic individual, it's a way to cover up their own insecurities and their differences in the way that they engage by being somebody else. And so that example, they're practicing smiling before school photos, not wanting to look weird or not be able to smile or, to stand out from their peers. Masking or suppressing autistic traits can look like stopping stimming in public. And that might be individuals holding their hands together really tightly or, being in a posture that looks uncomfortable to stop themselves moving in a way that might attract attention. But it's something that they actually need to be doing. Forcing eye contact when it does feel really uncomfortable for them. Monitoring their body language, so being really, really conscious of where they're putting their hands, the way that they're standing, the way that they look, to try and look more typical. Suppressing excitement about interests because other people might not understand why it's so interesting and exciting to talk about trains or talk about dinosaurs. Holding in their sensory responses. So even though they may be in a situation that is causing them perhaps pain or certainly discomfort, not putting their hands over their ears because other people might react to that. And so tolerating that discomfort and distress because it will be seen by other people as being perhaps negative. And then assimilation is a way that we can perhaps blend in um, with peers, so that it's easier for us to be in those social settings, and to hide the way that we do things. So taking on helpful roles to avoid socializing. It's probably a bit easier to do that actually as adults maybe than as children, but the super helpful child that offers to put food out on tables or help a parent with pouring drinks or setting things up and organizing things, is a way that we can mask and avoid needing to engage in more typical social interaction. Using others as social support, so needing to have that wingman there to assist us to engage in social interaction. Um, Feeling like conversations are unnatural, but pushing those boundaries, I guess, to allow us to engage in the small talk in a way that will cover up the fact that we don't really like it and kind of don't know what we're doing. But we can engage and laugh along and do things so that we fit in. Avoiding interactions where we can. So finding excuses to go and do something else, to check something, to help with something, to make a quick phone call. Maybe being out on our phones a little bit. So we might be with a group, but we're doing something with our phones so that we don't have to talk to everybody and we can just kind of follow along. I absolutely have children, clients who volunteer to help with yard duty, for example, and other things to avoid socialising, or choose to walk around with the yard duty teacher so that they don't have to enter into all of the playground social interactions that occur that are really stressful. Now, it is important, and I just felt that I really wanted to make a point of talking about masking for safety, because it is something that, while there are lots of reasons why masking is not helpful for autistic individuals, certainly from a mental health point of view and for other reasons, there are times when autistic children and adults may need to mask for their own safety. Now, this isn't about fitting in and finding individuals that are going to allow them, to be friends, for example, where we would really want autistic individuals to be able to be their authentic selves and find people that accept them for who they are. But there may be situations, and often the situations involve the intersectionality of other disability or other minority groups with autism. It isn't always the case. I mean, autistic individuals may just be, unfortunately, in situations where the people around them are not safe people. But it's important for us to recognise that masking may be a survival tactic for some individuals. Now, that may not be all the time. It might just be in specific situations. But we absolutely hear about, and it does unfortunately happen in Australia, but potentially more often hear about things happening perhaps in the US and in other countries where, for example, an individual that is actively stimming and engaging in other, what we might consider, or showing other autistic traits that are fairly typical, may appear threatening to someone, and that might lead to the police being called, for example, and other things happen. And we know that that does happen, unfortunately, to children of colour and adults of colour as well. It's really important to recognise that in those sorts of situations, sometimes it's actually about teaching, unfortunately, children in particular situations to be able to mask. So while it's not something that I want to promote, I guess, from a point of view of, in a perfect world, I don't think anyone should have to mask. People should be able to be their authentic selves. I think it's really, really important to acknowledge that there are members of our community, including children, and that might be children of colour. It might be individuals that are gender diverse, girls perhaps more than boys in some situations, although boys absolutely do mask. Queer autistic youth, children from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, anyone from a minority group may need to, at some point, suppress, in particular, their autistic traits for their own safety. And so these are just examples, they are not exhaustive, but suppressing a natural reaction to injustice or unfairness, because if they get distressed, that could lead to repercussions from the community, perhaps, and certainly from individuals that they're with that could be unsafe. Over-compliance in particular situations, so they're not being labelled as problematic and being punished in ways that are really detrimental to them. perhaps hiding cultural differences as well as autistic traits in some situations, extra vigilance about appearing respectful to authority figures, and certainly with regards to authority figures that have power in the community, like the police. Those are things that unfortunately people need to think about. So I just really wanted to make sure that while we're talking about masking as something that is in general detrimental, and we need to make spaces for children to not mask, it's really important to be realistic about the fact that there are some situations where it is necessary for safety, and that needs to be acknowledged. So when we're looking for masking or signs of masking in children and young people, we might be looking for differences in behaviour between home and school, and certainly that idea um, of the perfect student at school and then meltdowns and distress at home can be absolutely an indicator of masking. Um, Children that can hold it together in public but fall apart at home or in other safe spaces, again, can be an indication that there's masking happening. Exhaustion after school or social events, needing long periods to recover after social activities, and anxiety, increased anxiety around social situations can also be indicators of masking. And then if we're seeing changes in communication, our ability to communicate, but also perhaps the way that individuals are communicating in different settings, that might also be an indication of masking. Now, I think it's important to recognise that these might not be indicators of masking for some individuals, but they can be signs that a child is masking and they may need some additional support. Now, masking can be, as I've said, harmful. Um, it absolutely can be detrimental to any individuals that are masking, particularly for autistic individuals. I won't go into this in a huge amount of detail because I know we've not got much longer to go. But I think it's very, very important to recognise that what we're seeing now, and we're seeing in the research as well, in autistic adults, that masking in childhood as well as masking in adulthood has detrimental impacts on individuals. And what we see is that masking can lead to increased rates of anxiety and depression and also burnout. Chronic stress from constantly monitoring behaviour can have impacts on the immune system. Emotional exhaustion can be leading to meltdowns at home, which is also going to create an impact for the rest of the family as well as for the child who's experiencing that distress. On top of those mental health and emotional concerns and physical consequences, um, individuals that mask for prolonged periods, and certainly when it's happening really early, I think in development, can lead to a loss of connection to our authentic selves. Confusion about our own needs and feelings and boundaries and what we're okay with and what we're not. It can also impact on self-esteem and self-worth, and feeling happy with and being able to accept who we are and our natural autistic characteristics. It can also have impacts longer term in terms of educational our educational needs, but also what we've learnt at school. If we're using cognitive resources for masking, we are not going to be able to use the energy that we should have for learning and engaging at school, even if we might be going through the motions. So children may not actually be having the learning experiences that they need due to their masking. It might also mean that we don't identify the support needs of individuals because they're masking. And so they're not getting support that they need that will actually make things easier for them. And there is absolutely a risk, an increased risk of autistic burnout in adolescence and in adulthood with persistent masking. So when we want to advocate for our children, and bring up masking with educators in particular, but also therapists, think about how we might be able to support educators to understand things from um, our children's perspective. So we might want to be letting them know that, yes, we understand that they look like they're coping, but they might be working really hard. And in your experience, this is what they do. So sharing examples of how you see um, your child masking in particular situations and what is happening at other times. And not that it's a problem with home because they're distressed and having meltdowns at home, that their overall stress levels, because of how hard they're working at school, are leading to those behaviours outside. And recruiting therapists to assist you with that can be really beneficial. But you may have to have these conversations with therapists as well that perhaps are feeling like your child is managing really well and is being really compliant in their therapy sessions, but again, having meltdowns and are distressed afterwards, which might indicate that the therapist needs to change their approach. So advocating by supporting those other people involved with your child to see what you see. Um, Asking them to observe changes perhaps in their child's behaviour at different times in the school day, for example. Are they withdrawn at particular points where, particularly when there's unstructured times, what's happening there? Share your observations at home and advocate for accommodations. Often the supports that we are asking or we need to be put in place to reduce masking are about supporting our children to have breaks and to be regulated at other times. And those are supports that are going to help them for lots of different reasons, not just masking. From a broader point of view, we want them to be able to feel accepted for being themselves. So that might also mean educating educators and therapists in how to be affirming of your child's neurotype, how to support them to be accepting of difference, and to promote acceptance of difference amongst their peers as well. And those are ongoing conversations that we may need to have with individuals. And then there are things we can do at home to support our children, particularly if we do identify that they're masking in different settings. We want to be supporting them to have a safe space at home. So we want to welcome stimming. We want to let them talk about their special interests, providing that safe space at home, giving them downtime, not pushing them to be like other children, accepting their authentic selves and their authentic ways of being. Having conversations about masking can be helpful too. Having conversations about what will help them best in situations where they're under stress. And perhaps having signals if you're out as a family to communicate when your child needs downtime or needs to receive some support from you. And focusing on supporting genuine connections with family and with peers and in the community rather than on how they are performing socially according to other expectations. Finally, I think it just is important that if you do find that your child is masking a lot and it's impacting on their well-being, it might be helpful for you to seek out support from a mental health professional. And some of the signs that you might see, obviously, well-being being affected in general is a red flag, but thinking about things like frequent meltdowns and withdrawal, whether that's happening at school or after school, school refusal, physical symptoms that could be occurring from stress. So that could be, feeling sick all the time, for example, and expressing that they don't feel like they can be themselves. All of those things really are signs that a child is struggling, um, and that masking is potentially causing challenges for them that need to be addressed, and we need to be making sure that we're providing children with the support they need. Now I've got to questions. I'm so sorry, Christy. Talking too long. I'm going to stop share.
I reckon we've got time
I
for.
haven't looked at the
No, it's
clock.
okay. That's okay. No, look, we have time for one question. Now, folks, I am just going to let you know that we can't answer individual questions because we can't give you professional or personal advice. So I'm just going to broadly question one of these. And one topic that has just been coming through a lot is um, how do we let professionals know, so maybe our GPs or our pediatricians, when our kids mask so well that nobody's seeing it but us at home, how do we get therapy and get the help that our kiddos actually need? So how do we get these additional supports in place when it feels like nobody's seeing this except for us? How are we able to support our kids through this?
I think probably one of the biggest things is finding a GP and a pediatrician who listen to actually listen to you and that understand authentic experiences of autistic individuals. Because if you have a GP or a pediatrician or any other health professional that really understands autistic experience, then they won't doubt what you're saying, because they will understand that that is absolutely something that is quite typical, unfortunately, of neurodivergent presentations. And certainly, a neurodivergent child that is under stress is potentially going to behave in different situations in different ways. Um, Recognizing that also a GP or a pediatrician is only seeing your child maybe every 6 months or whatever it is. And so, um, if possible, providing maybe some information from other professionals or educators or other people that know your child and are seeing maybe differing behaviours that can add to the information you're providing. Um, Using some real examples as well, to really illustrate how difficult it is. And that, yes, they seem to be doing well at school, for example. However, the distress that they're experiencing after school is having an enormous impact on their ability to function, and the family are not functioning. Really be blunt about what's happening and how distressing it is for the child, and for the family. And I can't stress this enough. If your pediatrician or GP, whoever it is not listening and is either not believing you, or is blanketly saying that perhaps it's just your parenting and you need to change that or other things. There's always stuff that we can do differently that might help, but that's not going to magically solve a child that's masking. And so if they are not listening and are just sort of fobbing you off and saying that it needs to be different things, seeking out further support is what you need, more than anything, because I think persisting with a clinician that is not listening is actually just going to cause perhaps more harm to you as well, in terms of the distress and frustration in not being listened to, um, and potentially stop you getting the support you need when you need it. So there's no easy answers there, but if you've got pediatricians that are willing to learn, and doctors that are willing to learn, and that will listen, amazing. But if not, it's okay to seek support elsewhere.
Yeah. And on that note, I'd just like to acknowledge that I appreciate that some of our audience may live in like rural and
Yep.
remote areas, which can be incredibly complicated. But I do know that there are telehealth options like that as well that can be helpful in getting appointments and things like that for that next step of support. Um, so folks, like I said, we can't take any more questions tonight. I'm sorry. There's a lot of you with a lot of questions, which we absolutely love. I can tell you though, that it has been absolutely wonderful having you here, Raelene. This has just been so incredibly valuable, and we really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us. So enlightening and informative. I have learned a heap, and I'm betting our audience has as well. I also want to say a huge thank you to all of our participants as well. We appreciate you, and I hope that you found this really insightful too. So in the coming days, all registered participants will receive an email, and it will be containing a link to this session's recording. Raelene has kindly agreed to provide the slides as well. We'll also be sending out a link to Raelene's website as well, and ways to connect with alongside families so that you can continue the conversation. So you can stay connected with us. You can follow us on social media at Alongside Families. But before you go, I would like to highlight that we have got some incredible free events coming up. If you all don't know, everything we do here is free. That's right, you heard it here. But the next really great things that we have coming up, we have got some workshops that I'd like to talk about. We have got Advocacy at School. That one's on the 20th of August. This one is for parents and carers who are at the beginning of that advocating journey, and they're like, what do I do next? How do I do this? We also have Partnering with Your Child's School on the 1st of September, and this is for those who are wanting to create strong foundations and relationships with the school, so at that beginning point. And we have a brand new workshop coming out, which is Autistic Families. And this is on the 8th of September. And this is for parents and carers that are autistic themselves and are parenting autistic children. You can find details and registration for all of these events on our website at belongsidefamilies.org.au. So once again, thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at future Belongside events. You've all been wonderful. And Raelene, you're an absolute superstar. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. Good night, everyone.